Welcome to Nightmares Incorporated, where our goal is to make your sleep anything but restful. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's tale, entitled Destroyer. My name is Richard Coulson, but most of you probably know me by my pen name, Victor Reichard. Many of you have heard of me. Most of you have my books in your homes, and all of you are aware of what's been happening lately. That's why I'm choosing to write this. I don't know what you'd call it. I guess a confession? Under my real name. Although I can't say to what extent I am responsible for current events, I acknowledge that I have a certain level of accountability, although I still am unaware of how. Once I finish this, it will be sent out to every major newspaper in the United States, as well as every country that my work has been translated into. I want everyone to know the truth. 11 years ago, I was a struggling writer working as a substitute high school English teacher. Although, to be honest, I did more of the struggling writer bit than the working part. I had been attempting to get something published for 7 years, receiving nothing but one rejection after another. My wife at the time supported both of us by working 2 jobs while I banged away at the keyboard, producing failure after failure after failure. I remember telling her again and again how Dean Koontz' wife gave him 5 years to get his writing career going, and how I was sure she never regretted it. But once I hit the 6-year mark without publishing so much as a short story, that line started turning bitter in my mouth. My family wasn't much help either. Not that they weren't supportive, but that they were overly supportive. Every family get-together, the line, "Well, you're the writer," or some variation of it would come up. "Get to writing some scripts so we can have better movies," my brother would say. Or, "Hey, can you look over this application letter I wrote for college? After all, you're the writer of the family." I know they meant well, but each time I'd feel like a fraud, a pretender. The alcohol came first for me. I think at the time I was thinking about all the great writers from the past and how most of them reportedly drank more than a first-year college student at a frat party. Ephedrine came next. I took it in any form I could get it. Pills, powder, didn't matter. I had convinced myself that it made me more creative, when in reality all it did was make my heart beat fast and give me constant stomach issues. But when I combined the two, in my mind I became Charles Dickens. I became a once-in-a-generation author, the best of my time. Heart beating 1,000,000 miles a minute, ashtray full of cigarette butts, bottle of vodka sitting next to me at all times. I'd sit there at my desk in my small office in our house, writing for 8 hours at a time. Fingers would be flying over the keyboard, word count climbing at a consistent rate, story flowing out of me like water. In the zone, I'd think. In the fucking zone, baby. By the time I sobered up, I'd read over what I had written and see nothing but 15,000 to 20,000 words that amounted to little more than gibberish, or the ramblings of a madman. I became bitter, drank more, popped more pills, kept hammering away, refusing to acknowledge the fact that maybe I just couldn't write. I don't blame Samantha for leaving me. She never wanted to kill my dream. She just recognized that the dream had become my whole life, leaving no room for her. I blamed her at the time, though. I think back to who I was during the divorce. I was the textbook definition of the toxic soon-to-be ex-husband. I called her every name in the book, played the pity card, threatened self-harm to try and gain her sympathy, and then devolved into hatred and vitriol. The alcohol abuse got truly out of hand then. I'd spend days in a drunken stupor, popping pills to keep myself awake and drinking. I'd rage around the house, occasionally pass out for 4 or 5 hours, then awake and pick up right where I left off. I wanted to die. I'd sometimes take the .44 revolver I had bought on a whim a few years prior, I think under the pretext that it was research for a detective novel or some shit, and hold it under my chin, finger on the trigger. But I could never do it. Not out of any concern over how it would affect my family, you understand. And certainly not because I wanted to live. No, I refused to pull the trigger out of spite. Why the fuck should she get to win? I'd think at the time. Why the fuck would you want the world to know that it beat you? The world? The alcohol would respond. The world doesn't even know you exist, Richie. You could live forever or die tomorrow and no one would even notice. So make them notice. The pills would chime in. Make them all know your name. This cycle would play out at least once a month. Bills piling up, house soon to be foreclosed on, while I did little more than wallow in my own self-pity and drink the town dry. During one of my drunken rage fits, I broke the glass I was drinking out of after slapping it into the side of the wall. I don't remember why I did it. To be fair, I don't remember much from that time very clearly. I cut the shit out of my hand and stared at the blood welling within my palm for a moment.
Make them notice you,
a voice said.
Write my story, and they will know you.
At the time, I couldn't tell if that voice belonged to the alcohol, the pills, or maybe the spiteful part of me that was only living out of habit these days. Maybe it was all three. Or maybe it was something else. I'm still not sure. Whoever it had been doesn't really matter, I guess. What matters is that that was the night I created Destroyer. I didn't have an outline when I sat down at my computer, didn't have an idea what the story would be about, didn't have a setting, didn't even have any characters in mind. I only thought about Destroyer. I wanted to write something nasty, something vile, something violent. I honestly can't remember how long I wrote during that first sitting. All I remember is my fingers flying over the keyboard, my blood dripping down onto the keys, my mind blank, the story coming from somewhere other than my imagination. For the next 4 weeks, I wrote every day. Vodka and pills my main sustenance, anger fueling my creativity. I put every ounce of hatred and self-pity I was feeling at the time into my story, using it to create the most horrifying monster I could think of. A creature that came from nowhere, but was ancient, older than mankind. A beast that had no weaknesses, no mercy, nothing that could be understood as motivation for its carnage, that the carnage itself was almost the motivation. People were its playthings, their lives meaning as much to it as the life of a mosquito meant to me. There would be no outs with this creature, no dusty tome sitting in the basement of an old library that my characters could find and learn about the monster from. No Google search that would reveal ancient stories or carvings referring to the beast, and maybe a glimmer of hope at a possible weakness. None of that shit was allowed. This was a story with no deus ex machina. There was no escaping the Destroyer. Even I didn't know everything about the creature I was writing about. I didn't know where it was from, or even what it wanted. I wasn't even completely sure what it looked like. I imagined a hulking beast, gray of skin, something that almost looked like it was born of smoke and ash. But at the time, that was as far as I got. In reality, I think the first Destroyer novel was a self-insert fanfiction. Only instead of inserting myself as the hero, I was the monster. A month later, I completed the book and reread what I had written. I was appalled by what I saw on the pages. It was vile, I had succeeded in that, but I was shocked by how bleak and mean-spirited it was. What was worse is that the characters were well written, likable, with understandable motivations and a depth of complexity I had never achieved before. My protagonist was an anthropologist named Chance. He was joined by an ambitious investigative journalist named Sabrina, and contrary to the trope, she wasn't a love interest. By the end, there was a true friendship, a mutual respect and admiration forged out of all they had seen, starting at a previously unknown temple in South America and ending on Manhattan Island. They were brave, witty, determined. And I slaughtered them. Yeah, I could say that the destroyer was to blame, but it was me. I fucking hated them, and I killed them in the most horrendous way I could. Chance had tried confronting the beast once they became cornered, having his hero's moment, only for the destroyer to break his back, leaving him helpless. He then could only look on as the beast tore Sabrina apart, violating her in ways that upon rereading it, I had to step away from the computer for a little bit. When my monster had finished with her and dropped her body to the ground like discarded trash, it crushed Chance's head with its foot while he railed against it and swore he would kill it one day. It hadn't intended to kill him. It was just bored and leaving the scene. It had forgotten that he was there. Did I write this? I had thought at the time. Why did I write this? What the fuck is wrong with me? I was going to consign it to the trash bin, or maybe keep it as a reminder of what too much alcohol and pills can really produce. But as you know, I didn't do either of those things. Instead, I sent it off to a publisher. I figured why not? They had rejected everything else up to this point, so what was one more failed story? I got a call 2 weeks later, and the first thing the man on the other end of the line asked was if I had any more ideas for my monster. I was offered a 4-book deal to start and a large cash advance to get working on a follow-up. I didn't understand why at the time, and honestly, I still don't. That's why I became Victor Reichardt. Because, full disclosure, I was ashamed of what I had written. I should have turned down the offer. I should have known that no good could come from this monster. But when the devil comes for your soul, he comes with a blank check. Over the next 10 years, I wrote 5 more Destroyer novels, each one of them topping the New York Times bestseller list, each one of them selling out faster than the last. People ate the lurid tales of my monster up like it was candy. Critics fucking hated me, of course. The word hack was used to describe me on more than one occasion, and I couldn't really argue with that if I was honest. Hell, it was essentially the same damn story each time. The destroyer would turn up in some random place and just start wrecking shop. It would destroy public property, cause fires in its wake, but mostly it would just kill people. There were no preferences. It didn't stalk its victims, nor did it try to stay hidden in the shadows or engage in anything that could be considered psychological warfare. I always gave the impression that it had been waiting a long time to lash out at humanity, and now that that time had come, it did so without restraint. This enabled me to write a few exciting clashes throughout the series. It started with smaller battles against local police, but by the 3rd book, things had escalated to a full-scale war against the military. In a way, my monster had become my very own Godzilla, just with a sadistic streak that gave the impression that it enjoyed its work. I was always vague about how large the monster was, though. I usually depicted it around 9 feet tall, although sometimes that height would fluctuate, depending on what I needed my monster to do. I gave the subtle suggestion that the beast could change its size depending on the situation, although I never elaborated. Along with that, it seemed the monster could teleport, seeing how it could show up almost anywhere it wanted, and would often leave scenes of destruction when it apparently had become bored. I also never explained this ability, but did have a character in the 4th book of the series. I think he was a theoretical physicist, postulate that perhaps the creature was stepping outside of our space-time and into a higher dimension, giving it the ability to travel anywhere it wished, almost as if by thought alone. Once again, I never elaborated, but I liked the idea. So yes, to be fair, hack was a pretty good word for me. The other word they used most often was misogynist, and I couldn't really argue with that one either. The female characters in my books always met a pretty grisly end. I suppose a therapist would have a bit to say about that, but I didn't have time for analyzation, professional or otherwise. I was too busy rolling in money, women, booze, and uppers that were now prescribed by a doctor rather than salvaged from old diet pills procured online. I was always careful not to reveal too much about the Destroyer, as I knew that the creature's mystique was as much a reason people kept coming back besides the unabashed violence and brutality. For one thing, I never clearly stated any motivations for its actions, only hinted that it hated humanity and took pleasure in ending us. Secondly, the Destroyer never spoke to anyone. I had the idea that it could speak, and that it was far more intelligent than it let on, but that it never deemed anyone worthy enough to speak to. But beyond that, I genuinely think it was the brutality that people loved. The Destroyer for them was akin to a natural disaster, and the fact that my characters remained well written and likable only heightened the horror of their inevitable fates. Of course, I didn't always kill them right away. A couple of them lasted through a few books. And it was amazing how people saw that just surviving my monster was a form of victory. But in the end, they all fell to the Destroyer. The books came out easy, and although I didn't understand why, I knew I had a goldmine on my hands. I knew that I could drip feed information about this creature for 10 more years if I wanted to, and people would keep coming back, ravenous for new revelations. There were fan theories everywhere online about what the creature actually was and how it could possibly be stopped as it rampaged across the planet, decimating everything in its path. And I knew I would continue for as long as they were interested, because when the Destroyer was retired, so was I. I couldn't think of any other ideas, although I had tried a few times over the years. I had attempted a novel completely separate from my Destroyer series, something a bit higher brow, something that I would publish under my own name. However, the few times I tried, I would read over whatever I had written and see the same bland, lifeless shit I was writing before Destroyer. I had to admit to myself that the critics were right about me, that I was a one-trick pony. But I also learned that money, alcohol, and the right combination of pills made all of that easy to forget. Fuck it, I'd tell myself, and fuck them. Just enjoy the ride, Richie. It won't last forever, so just enjoy the ride. Over the last 10 years, I've turned down 4 movie deals because they wouldn't give me complete creative control, and the last thing I wanted was my monster posted all over the screen. The trick is to rarely show the monster, or in my case, keep changing its appearance as if everybody who saw it saw something slightly different each time. Mystery is what makes a monster scary. Familiarity makes them mundane. Samantha and I became friendlier over the years. I even accepted an invitation to her wedding 4 years ago and paid off her and her husband's house. Now, I will admit that was more of a big shot move for my own ego than anything I did out of altruism. But who cares? House was still paid off, and if a small part of me hoped she regretted leaving me, then so be it. In many ways, I'm still a small, petty man. So for a time, I had the good life. I was rich, popular, powerful. But when you sell your soul to the devil, he always comes to collect what's due. I didn't think that when the murders first started, but I do now. I first learned about them 6 months ago from my agent, Saul Rothstein. When I saw his name show up on my phone, I figured he was checking up on my progress on the 7th book, or maybe he had scheduled a signing somewhere. "Saul," I answered. "Have you seen the news lately?" He asked without so much as a "hey there, how you doing?" "No," I replied. "You know I only deal in fictional horror. This isn't more shit about strange noises from the sky, is it? You do realize that trend pops up every few years, right?" "I sent you a link to a story," he continued. "Look it over, say nothing to the press if they call you. I've already scheduled you a meeting with the FBI. You're not under suspicion of anything, they just want to ask you some questions. The meeting is tomorrow at 4. Saul, what are you talking about? Is this a joke? Just read the article, Richard. It'll explain better than I can. I'll see you tomorrow. And then he hung up. I clicked the link he had sent me and read the same article I'm sure many of you have seen by this point. This particular article was from the Times, and it detailed 4 separate murders that had taken place in different parts of the world on the same day. One was in America, one in South America, one in Japan, and one in Australia. The scenes were described in very little detail given what the article stated as the horrific condition of the victims in question. It only provided the metaphor of a wild animal attack as a descriptor. However, as they detailed what they could about the scene itself and where the victims were found, I recognized the setting. I could see it in my mind, all the details they had left out. The one in America, for instance, I knew it was 2 male victims and 1 female victim. I knew that one of the men had been torn in half, the woman had been decapitated, and that the other man was crucified and disemboweled. It was a scene from the 3rd book in the Destroyer series. Needless to say, I was not overly surprised by the revelation that my name had been written in blood at each scene. Not my real name, of course, but my pen name. I had a feeling that I knew what the FBI wanted to talk about. It appeared that my work had inspired the wrong type of people. I felt a little ill that my books might have motivated something like this, and in 4 separate locations, that implied a group activity. Saul arrived at my home an hour before the meeting, with my lawyer James Malcolm in tow. If I'm not under suspicion, then why did you bring James? I had asked, thinking that having a high-priced lawyer present might look a little defensive. Because you're about to talk to the fucking FBI, Richard, Saul had answered simply. I conceded that that was a good point, and in truth, when the agents arrived, they seemed to have expected it. We traded pleasantries, one of them claimed to be a big fan, and we got to it. In truth, Saul had been right. The meeting was very relaxed, and their main avenue of inquiry was wondering if I had received any correspondence from fans that I might describe as disturbed. That they suspected that it was possible that a cult had formed out of a certain subsection of my fandom. One that was trying to impress me by emulating my monster. I told them that I had never received any contact from a fan that I would consider to be actually unhinged. Sure, there were the edgelords who wrote to tell me that they prayed to the Destroyer nightly, and there were the pseudo-intellectuals who wrote to tell me that they understood the secret subtext in my series. These hidden meanings ranged from the Destroyer representing global warming, the toxicity of the patriarchy, the dangers of religion, the plight of First Nations people in America, I'm still trying to figure that one out, or a biting satire on the sudden rise of horror movies that were more blood and gore than actual plot. Between the two, I preferred the edgelords. To these intellectual types, I always wanted to respond with, "Hey, do you want to know the real meaning of the Destroyer series? It makes me a lot of fucking money." I still gave the contact info for the fans that contacted me most often, but told the agents truthfully that I could be of very little help. I was currently working on the 7th novel, and when I'm in writing mode, I engaged with the outside world hardly at all. They thanked me for my time, and the agent who claimed to be a fan left with a signed copy of my 6th book, which I honestly expected to see on eBay within a week or 2. Once they had gone, I spoke with Saul for a while. "Do you think I should postpone the 7th book?" I asked. "I mean, people have died. I don't want it to look like I'm insensitive to the tragedy." Saul appeared to think about this for a moment or 2, then responded. "Keep writing, Richie. I'll gauge public reaction to the homicides, and if I feel there'll be a backlash, we'll postpone the release of the book." "Maybe I should kill it," I said. "If there really are a group of nutcases out there killing people because of my books, then maybe I should just kill the monster. Just end it. Take away their hero." "Let's not be hasty, Richard." Ah, Richard. Saul was in business mode now. "After all, think about it. The death of the Destroyer could be at least a 4-book arc, with possibly 2 books introducing a weakness and a protagonist that can finally get the job done. That's way too much money to walk away from, my friend. Besides, it's not your fault that some crazy bastards can't tell the difference between fiction and reality. Yeah, you're right, I conceded. Not because I thought he was, but because it's what I wanted to hear. After all, when the devil comes for your soul, he not only comes with a blank check, but he comes as your friend. Following that, I got back to writing. And to be honest, I didn't spare the murders that happened a second thought. But that's how it is when I write. The whole goddamn world disappears. All that exists is Destroyer. But then the first sightings happened, and I was forced to acknowledge what I had honestly suspected all along. As soon as I read that fucking article, in fact. Since I still wasn't paying any attention to the news, again, it was Saul who sent me a link to a video that had gone viral and was all over the networks, along with 2 others that were also picking up steam. You know the ones I'm talking about. The videos of a cloud of smoke that was 5 feet across and 10 feet high, always keeping a shape, even though the smoke swirled and shifted. Within the smoke, the outline of a body. And although it was hard to work out much detail, it was easy to tell that the shape was vaguely humanoid. The newscasters called it a mysterious apparition seen near the subway, and speculated if this was viral marketing for a new found footage film. On the sites where these videos were uploaded that allowed comments, the comments ranged from, "Decent special effects, give this man a job in Hollywood," and "Fake, not really even well done either." But I knew what it was. I knew because the thing I was looking at in these videos previously only existed within my mind. I was looking at the Destroyer. Since I could never get a firm handle on what the creature looked like, I would imagine that it was almost fully composed of smoke, ash, and rock. Something primal, elemental. But the smoke would always obscure it in my imagination, as if I couldn't quite envision the creature because I had never actually seen it. I never described the monster this way in one of my books. Smoke would be present when it was there, but never used as a kind of cloak, not an actual part of its being. For days I was glued to the computer, watching the sightings as they came in one after the other. And I realized that I had been wrong. And here I thought I understood the essence of horror. That if you show the monster too much, it ceases to be scary. But as I watched this creature destroy property, fling people around as if they were toys, fight a squad of police officers and tear them apart, their bullets seemingly just an annoyance to it, I realized that I was wrong. If the monster is ruthless, if it is cruel and unstoppable, you can show it as much as you like, and it will still be scary. Because there's nothing you can do to protect yourself from it. I watched my monster wreak havoc in videos coming from all over the world, sometimes only minutes apart. Just like in my books, the Destroyer wasn't shy. There was no buildup, no string of unexplainable murders, no investigation by police that slowly revealed an inhuman threat, no attempt to conceal its presence. Just like in my books, I got the impression that this creature had waited a long time to go to war with humanity, and it was relishing that its time had come. There would be a massacre in one city, and then as if the monster was bored, it would vanish as if it had never been there, only to turn up somewhere else and start all over. Politicians were all over the news requesting calm, asking people not to panic, announcing curfews and shelter in place. As if any of that would help against a creature that could just show up in your home, or wherever else it wanted to. I watched it all, and didn't understand how it was possible. I understood the concept of a tulpa, but couldn't believe that that's what was going on here. Had this creature been conjured into reality by mass belief? Was such a thing even possible? The body count continued to climb, added to by the truly unhinged of society who felt they should help the creature, that it was a harbinger of the end times, and they would assist it in its holy work. At some point during the chaos, I received the news about Samantha. She and her husband Jeff had been slaughtered in their home. I had to pry, but they still wouldn't give me much detail, only saying that it resembled a bear attack, but one inflicted with malice. I grieved her death, and couldn't help but feel responsible. In a way, she had helped in the creation of Destroyer, and I remembered the hatred I felt towards her as I wrote that first book. Hatred that I'm sure had permeated the writing itself, as the blood from my cut hand covered the keyboard on that first night. I resolved that I would kill the creature. No build-up, no 6-book arc. I'd kill him by the end of the 7th book. I created the damn thing after all. I could kill it. I got back to writing, crafting, in my own opinion, a hastily constructed story with a couple of healthy retcons to allow for a previously discovered weakness that could be exploited. I wasn't sure if this would help, or how I would get the word out once it was done. Would people even buy horror books when there was a literal monster stalking the world? I decided that it didn't matter, that I had to try. If I was truly responsible for bringing this thing into being, then I was responsible for every life it had taken. Once again, I was writing a Destroyer novel with blood on my hands. I wrote as if in a haze, the story coming easily now that I had begun. Vodka next to me as usual, heart beating fast, sweat on my brow, forearms burning as my fingers were flying over the keys. In the zone, baby. In the fucking zone. But when I took a break a couple of evenings ago after writing for a good 6-hour stint, I leaned back to decide where the story would go next, and saw Samantha staring at me from over the top of my computer screen. Half of her face missing. Blood-stained skull clearly visible. I screamed and pushed back in my chair so hard I almost tipped it over. I stood and backed up against the wall. Along with her disfigured face, her torso had been opened. She was split from just below her sternum to just above her pelvic bone. The cavity was empty, only glistening red, a dim light visible within the darkness. "I'm your gift, Richard," she spoke, her voice different than I remembered, hollow, empty. "What?" I stammered back, and then, "You're not really here. I'm not seeing this." "I'm here, you silly man," she responded. "He hasn't gifted me to you. His harbinger, his prophet." "What the fuck are you talking about? How is any of this shit possible?" "He came to me, to know you," she continued. "I was blind, so he showed me. And then he blessed me with his touch, with his seed. And now I am to serve you, as your muse, your companion, your slave." I felt my mind begin to fray, the implications of what she was saying feeling like a brick settling into the pit of my stomach. "I'll kill him," I breathed. "You can't kill him, Richard," she said sweetly, still smiling at me, something that could only be described as admiration in her eyes. "Of course I can," I argued. "I created him. I can destroy him." "That's your ego talking, Richard. You didn't create him. You only woke him up. But he appreciates you all the same, my dear," she continued, starting to walk around the desk towards me. I began to back into the corner, not wanting her ravaged body near me, not wanting her to touch me and shatter what little hope I had left that I was imagining this conversation. "I am but the first of many gifts, Richard. The faithful are always rewarded." "Get out of here!" I said, pushing myself into the corner as she continued to draw closer. "I will for now, my dear," she said. "For the master is coming. He wants to meet you." She reached out with her right hand and caressed my cheek. I let out a pathetic little yelp as she did so. Her skin was almost painfully cold, but still, a part of me responded to her touch in a way that filled me with revulsion, but also with dark and twisted desires. And then she was gone. leaving me alone in a room that was lit only by the glow of my computer screen. From outside my window, I could hear faint screams, and I knew that she had not been lying. The monster was in my area, and likely coming to meet its maker. Deciding that I did not want to meet this creature who tore people apart like they were paper, with the sadistic glee of a child burning ants with a magnifying glass, and feeling guilt and horror over what I imagine it had done to Samantha, I took the only action I felt I had left. Sitting back down in my chair, I pulled the revolver from my top desk drawer. I hadn't looked at it in years, but had always kept it as a reminder of how low I had once been. It was still loaded. I tried to convince myself that what I was about to do was recompense for what I had caused, that I was punishing myself for my hand in the devastation that was happening. In truth, I was being a coward. I didn't want to confront the monster I had brought forth, and I didn't want to see Samantha's mangled body again. I just wanted a way out. Without giving myself much time to change my mind, I put the barrel under my chin and pulled the trigger. An unknown amount of time later, I awoke with my head upon my desk. I sat up, briefly elated at the idea that all this had been a bad dream. But then I looked down at my desk and saw the dark red blood that covered it. Looking behind me, I saw a splatter of blood upon the wall, with what looked like parts of my brain. I ran my hands over my head, but could not detect an injury, although it was quite apparent that I had indeed shot myself. What the hell is happening? I asked the empty room. Then, from my peripheral vision, I saw a shape form next to me. The smell of sulfur and blood assaulted my senses and caused me to involuntarily retch. I turned my head and looked at my monster for the first time. It was similar to what I had pictured in my mind, but still very different. However, I did at once realize upon seeing it that I had not created this thing. I had channeled it. It stood at what I approximated was 9 feet tall, thickly muscled gray-black skin that appeared to be carved from granite. Smoke and ash swirled around the creature, slightly obscuring its lower body. Taloned hands were by its sides, the claws still dripping with fresh blood. A pair of bat-like wings were folded loosely upon its back, and its face was broad and long, also appearing to have been carved from stone. 6 bright yellow eyes stared at me, 3 running down each side of its face. Sharp teeth were slightly visible in a mouth that looked to be smiling at me. And then the creature spoke to me.
You may die when I permit it.
The beast said, its voice the booming of thunder. What the fuck are you? I screamed at it. Instead of answering in words, visions entered my mind, overwhelming my senses and causing me to cry out in fear. I saw monsters locked in combat, creatures of such terrible visages that I could not tell who was good and who was evil, or even if there was such a thing. Some had 4 faces: eagle, bull, lion, man. Others appeared to be giant eyes surrounded by wings. These monsters were tearing each other apart, most of them wielding weapons that looked to be forged out of fire or light. The roar of what I assumed to be a dragon somewhere in the distance. But then the scene shifted, and I saw what looked to be thousands of meteorites falling to the earth. But I knew they weren't meteorites. I knew that they were some of those creatures I had seen. They were the ones who had been vanquished and were now raining down upon the earth. One of them struck the ground with such force that they were driven into the planet, briefly leaving behind a smoking pit that was quickly covered by the soil as if the earth itself was imprisoning it. A symbol briefly appeared on the charred ground and then was gone, and I knew that that symbol was the creature's true name, and that nothing would ever grow on the blighted land on which it fell. I then saw the true face of the creature, the one that was still imprisoned beneath the earth. It was a hulking beast that would stand above the mountain tops at its full height and would scorch the earth within its wake. I realized that what stood before me now was but an extension of the being still locked within the bottomless pit. But I could sense that the lock was weakening, and that I had caused that. The world that was would fall, and I had caused that. The gods of old will die, and I had caused that. Humanity will burn, and I had caused that. The devil had finally come to collect. The visions fell away, and with them, so did my fear and denial. I looked up again with grateful eyes upon my master, my God, and I spoke its name. Apollyon, the destroyer, my God. I looked over to my right and saw that Samantha had returned, gazing upon me with worshipful eyes, finally seeing me for the great man that I was, finally learning her place at my feet. Just as many others will learn, or they will have me bathe in their blood. For my master has come, and nothing shall be withheld from me. I am his harbinger, his prophet. I created the belief and fostered the faith to weaken his bonds, and soon he will be free. He and his progeny, his locusts, will pour forth from the smoking pit and wash over the earth, biting and stinging the rich and poor alike, the just and the unjust. And I will write his gospel. I will preach the coming of the one who will sit at the head of all tables once the destruction has brought humanity to its knees. I will chronicle the exploits of my God and those of his brethren as they punish the world of man. From outside I can hear a trumpet. Do you hear it? Do you feel the breaking of the seals? Do not be afraid, dear reader, for our true gods have come, and those of you who survive will be given the chance to glory in their presence, or be devoured for your stubborn allegiance to the old gods. As I begin my work, I will leave you with this. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you with great wrath. Thank you for joining us here at Nightmares Incorporated, and we hope to see you again next week when we bring you another original story. Until then, sweet dreams.